Hey, guilty. Already first. Wow. I think my mic's on. I don't hear myself. That's... Oh, there we go. Man, the microphone's loud. Okay, now maybe it's good. Okay. Let's switch over to the bookstore. Hi. Wow, I'm tall on this one. I need to fix that. Ads are in progress. Great googly moogly. Okay. Oh, I forgot I had the creepy music playing here. Still up. It has been over 2 weeks since my last stream. It's kind of scary. 1 week I wasn't feeling great, and holiday last week, and here I am again. So let's see. I guess I'm okay. Me being okay is always up for debate. I'm giving myself echo, which is crazy. No, I can't hear anything. Was I echoing? No, I just had 2 different windows open. Okay, that's what it was. What was I gonna do? My model's a little bit laggy. That's absolutely normal. Of course, as soon as I opened the window, OBS wanted to update itself and said, "No, let's wait. We do not want to update you right now." Cal's not working. Lazy pain in the ass she is. Widgets data. I hate OBS updating itself. It's not my streambot's not wanting to react properly because the whole functionality of the streambot has changed. That's stats? No, it's not that stats. Docs. Stream information. No, but if I can get that window open, I can get to Cal. Okay. That's not what I was wanting. Well, damn. The SE Live docs are not opening. Cloud backup. Man, that's a lot of emotes. Who are they? Black Bunny. An epileptic. Yeah. Epileptic gamer. Chisoko. Cool. You follow a lot of people. Let's see what I'm typing. Okay. Send me an email to confirm that it's her. My email program's also a pain in the ass today. Okay. Well, what? Oh crap, it did. Bloody hell. That's gonna make me start streaming on cows. That's funny. Yeah, locked me out the cows. I'm tempted to see if it's actually open now. It'd be really funny if I started streaming on 2 channels right now. Let me check. Nope. I'm not live on Kel. Which I guess is a good thing because I'm not Kel. But what is a yen mega? I want my stream element spot to be under the right name. How hard is it? It won't let me log her out. Or will it? Technical difficulties after an OBS update. Imagine that happening. message is going out on Kel's stream. I'd like my own stream, please. Thank you. I got the on Mega, whatever that is. Are my sound alerts working? My browser's not working. That's a pain in the ass. Oh, that's working. So I guess that's a good sign. Not enough was playing Red Dead Online right up until the time I started streaming. But I was doing a trader run, so. So is the microphone picking me up okay? This is my first live stream with it, you know, above me instead of behind my phone. Calbot still wasn't going. Oh, I got 301 followers. Cool. Oh yeah, I was gonna... My head pat redeems aren't working right now because I haven't gotten it turned on yet. Because I have to log into a different site to get those starting. That's good to know that they sound good though. As my attempt at doing the Christmas, well, not the Christmas, but the Halloween gift exchange. I was supposed to have gotten one of the Elgato controller boards, but the price changed before they could order it, so it just got canceled, and they refunded it for me, so I ended up getting a couple other things that I needed. So I'm going to leave Kel's window open so I can hear when ads play. Let's see. Which one is it? Tab. It's one of the... Fugi Reacts, I think. Yeah, VTS React Fugi. That one. Okay. Make sure it's connected. Yes, allow. It needs to get my head pats. Okay, ear scritches. No, close that window. Test. No. 15. Thank you. Are they working? Yes, I get scritches. Okay. Which means most of it's working. So let's go ahead and skip over to the study. Ooh, I'm cold, but I have hydration, so I'm good for that. Let me make sure the fireplace is working. Fireplace looks good. Okay. So I really should be in part 5 of Casebook of Sherlock Holmes now. And it's already 9:18, so I am running way behind. Which I guess is on time for me. Really. Hydrate real quickly. I am currently drinking Glitch's Screamsicle, not sponsored. Okay. We're gonna read. That's what I hear. Real, yeah. Okay. Our first story for the night is, if I can stop coughing, The Adventure of the Creeping Man. Mr. Sherlock Holmes was always of opinion that I should publish the singular facts connected with Professor Presbury, if only to dispel once and for all the ugly rumors which some 20 years ago agitated the university, and were echoed in the learned societies of London. There were, however, certain obstacles in the way, and the true history of this curious case remained entombed in the tin box which contains so many records of my friend's adventures. Now we have at last obtained permission to ventilate the facts which formed one of the last cases handled by Holmes before his retirement from practice. Even now, a certain reticence and discretion have to be observed in the laying of the matter before the public. It was Sunday evening, early in September of the year 1903, that I received one of Holmes's laconic messages. "Come at once if convenient, if inconvenient, come all the same. Signed, Sherlock Holmes." The relations between us in those latter days were peculiar. He was a man of habits, narrow and concentrated habits, and I had become one of them. As an institution, I was like the violin, the shag tobacco, the old black pipe, the index books, and other, perhaps, less excusable. When it was a case of active work and a comrade was needed upon whose nerve he could place some reliance, my role was obvious. But apart from this, I had uses. I was a whetstone for his mind. I stimulated him. He liked to think aloud in my presence. His remarks could hardly be said to be made to me. Many of them would have been as appropriately addressed to his bedside. But nonetheless, having formed the habit, it became in some way helpful that I should register and interject. If I irritated him by a certain methodical slowness of my mentality, that irritation served only to make his own flame-like intuitions and impressions flash up more vividly and swiftly. Such was my humble role in our alliance. When I arrived at Baker Street, I found him huddled up in his armchair with updrawn knees, his pipe in his mouth and his brow furrowed with thought. It was clear that he was in the throes of some vexatious problem. With a wave of his hand he indicated my old armchair, but otherwise for half an hour he gave no sign that he was aware of my presence. Then, with a start, he seemed to come out of his reverie, and, with his usual whimsical smile, he greeted me back to what had once been my home. "You'll excuse a certain abstraction of mind, my dear Watson," he said. "Some curious facts have been submitted to me within the last 24 hours, and they in turn have given rise to some speculations of a far greater general character. I have serious thoughts of writing a small monograph upon the uses of dogs in the work of the detective." "But surely, Holmes, this has been explored," said I. "Bloodhounds, sleuthhounds." No, Watson. That is the side of the matter is, of course, obvious. But there is another which is far more subtle. You may recollect that in the case which you, in your sensational way, coupled with the copper beeches, I was able, by watching the mind of the child, to form a deduction as to the criminal habits of the very smug and respectable father. "I remember it well." My line of thoughts about dogs is analogous. A dog reflects the family life. Whoever saw a frisky dog in a gloomy family, or a sad dog in a happy one? Snarling people have snarling dogs. Dangerous people have dangerous ones. And their passing moods may reflect the passing moods of others. I shook my head. "Surely, Holmes, this is a little far-fetched," said I. He had refilled his pipe and resumed his seat, taking no notice of my comment. "The practical application of what I have said is very close to the problem which I am investigating. It is a tangled skein, you understand, and I am looking for loose ends. One possible loose end lies in the question: why did Professor Presbury's faithful wolfhound, Roy, endeavor to bite him?" I sank back in my chair in some disappointment. Was it for some trivial question as this I was summoned for my work? Holmes glanced across at me. "Ah, the same old Watson," he said. "You never learn that the gravest issues may depend upon the smallest things. But it is not one of the face of it estrange that stead, elderly philosopher. You've heard of Presbury, of course, the famous Camford psychologist. That's such a man whose friend has been his devoted wolfhound. Should now have been twice attacked by his own dog. What do you make of it?" "The dog is ill, perhaps." "Well, that has to be considered, but he attacks no one else, nor does he apparently molest his master, save on very special occasions. Curious, Watson, very curious. But young Mr. Bennet is before his time, if that is his ring. I'd hoped to have a longer chat with you before he came." There was a quick step on the stairs and a sharp tap at the door, and a moment later the new client presented himself. He was a tall, handsome youth about 30, well-dressed and elegant, but with something in his bearing which suggested the shyness of a student rather than of the self-possession of the man of the world. He shook hands with Holmes, and then looked with some surprise at me. "This is a very delicate matter, Mr. Holmes," he said. "Consider the relation in which I stand to the Professor Presbury, both privately and publicly. I can hardly justify myself if I speak before any third person. Have no fear, Mr. Bennet. Dr. Watson is the very soul of discretion, and I can assure you that this is a matter in which I am very likely to need an assistant." "As you like, Mr. Holmes. You will, I am sure, understand my having some reserves in the matter." "You will appreciate it, Watson, when I tell you that this is a gentleman, Mr. Trevor Bennet, is professional assistant to the great scientist, lives under his roof, and is engaged to his only daughter. Certainly we must agree that the professor has every claim upon his loyalty and devotion, but it may be best shown by taking the necessary steps to clear up this strange mystery." "I hope so, Mr. Holmes. That is my one object. Does Mr. Watson know the situation?" "I have not yet had time to explain it." "Then perhaps I had better go over the ground again before explaining some fresh developments." will do so myself, said Holmes, in order to show that I have the events in their due order. The Professor, Watson, is a man of European reputation. His life has been academic. There has never been a breath of scandal. He is a widower with one daughter, Edith. He is, I gather, a man of very virile and positive. One might also say combative character. So the matter stood until very few months ago. Then the current of his life is broken. He is 61 years of age, but he became engaged to the daughter of Professor Murphy, his colleague in the chair of the comparative anatomy. It was not, as I understand, a reasoned courting of an elderly man, but rather a passionate frenzy of youth, for no one could have shown himself a more devoted lover. The lady, Alice Morphy, was a very perfect girl both in mind and body, so that there was every excuse for the professor's infatuation. Nonetheless, it did not meet the full approval in his own family. "We thought it rather excessive," said our visitor. "Exactly. Excessive, and a little violent and unnatural. Professor Presbury was rich, however, and there was no objection upon the part of the father. The daughter, however, had other views, and there were already several candidates for her hand who, if they were less eligible from a worldly point of view, were at least more of her age. The girl seemed to like the professor in spite of his eccentricities. It was only age which stood in the way. About this time, a little mystery suddenly clouded the normal routine of the professor's life. He did what he had never done before. He left home and gave no indication where he was going. He was away for a fortnight, and returned looking rather travel-worn. He made no allusion to where he had been, although he was usually the frankest of men. It chanced, however, that our client here, Mr. Bennet, received a letter from a fellow student in Prague, who said that was glad to have seen Professor Presbury there, although he had not been able to talk to him. Only in this way did his own household learn where he had been. Now comes the point. From that time onwards, a curious change came over the professor. He became furtive and sly. Those around him had always had the feeling that he was not the man that they had known, and that he was under some shadow which had darkened his higher qualities. His intellect was not affected. His lectures were as brilliant as ever, but always there was something new, something sinister and unexpected. His daughter, who was devoted to him, tried again and again to resume the old relations and to penetrate the mask which her father seemed to have put on. You, sir, as I understand, did the same, but all in vain. And now, Mr. Bennet, tell you in your own words the incident of the letters." "Must understand, Dr. Watson, that the professor had no secrets from me. If I were his son or his younger brother, I could not have been more completely enjoyed in his confidence. As a secretary, I handled every paper which came to him, and I opened and subdivided his letters. Shortly after his return, all was changed. He told me that certain letters might come to him from London, which would be marked by a cross under the stamp. These were to be set aside for his eyes only. I may say that several of these did pass through my hands, that they had an EC mark, and were in the illiterate handwriting. If he answered them and all of the letters did not pass through my hands, nor the letter basket in which our correspondence was collected." "And the box," said Holmes. "Yes, the box. The professor brought back a little wooden box from his travels. It was the one thing which suggested a continental tour, for it was one of those quaint carved things one associates with Germany. This he placed in his instrument cupboard. One day, in looking for cannula, I took up the box. To my surprise, he was very angry and reproved me in words which were quite savage just for my curiosity. It was the first time such a thing had happened, and I was deeply hurt. I endeavored to explain that it was a mere accident and that I had touched the box, but all the evening I was conscious that he was looking at me harshly, and that the incident was rankling in his mind. Mr. Bennet drew out a little diary book from his pocket. That was on July 2nd, he said. "You're certainly an admirable witness," said Holmes. "I may need some of these dates which you have noted." I learned, among other things, from my great teacher. From that time that I observed abnormality in his behavior, I felt that it was my duty to study his case. Thus I have it here, and that is on that very day, July 2nd, that Roy attacked the professor as he came from his study into the hall. Again on July 11th, there was a scene of the same sort, and then I have a note of yet another upon July 20th. After that, we had to banish Roy to the stables. He was a dear, affectionate animal, but I fear I weary you. Mr. Bennet spoke in the tone of reproach, for it was very clear that Holmes was not listening. His face was rigid, and his eyes gazed abstractedly to the ceiling. With an effort, he recovered himself. "Singular, most singular," he murmured. "These details were new to me, Mr. Bennet. I think we now have fairly gone over the old ground, have we not? But you spoke of some fresh developments." The pleasant open face of our visitor clouded over, shadowed by some grim remembrance. "What I speak of occurred the night before last," said he. "I was lying awake about 2 in the morning when I was aware of the dull, muffled sound coming from the passage. I opened my door and peeped out. I should explain that the professor sleeps at the end of the passage." "That date being?" asked Holmes. Our visitor was clearly annoyed at so irrelevant an interruption. "I have said, sir, that it was the night before last, that is, September 4th. Holmes nodded and smiled. "Pray continue," he said. "He sleeps at the end of the passage, and would have had to pass my door in order to reach the staircase. It was really a terrifying experience, Mr. Holmes. I think that I am strong-nerved as my neighbors, but I was shaken by what I saw. The passage was dark, save for one window halfway along that threw a patch of light. I could see that something was coming along the passage, something dark and crouching. Then suddenly it emerged into the light, and I saw that it was he. He was crawling, Mr. Holmes, crawling. He was not quite on his hands and knees. I should say rather on his hands and feet, with his face sunk between his hands. Yet he seemed to move with ease. I was so paralyzed by the sight that it was not until he had reached my door that I was able to step forward and ask if I could assist him. His answer was extraordinary. He sprang up, spat out some atrocious word at me, and hurried on past me and down the staircase. I waited about an hour, but he did not come back. It must have been daylight before he regained his room." "Well, Watson, what do you make of that?" asked Holmes, with the air of a pathologist who presents a rare specimen. "Embargo, I suppose. I would have known a severe attack make a man walk just such a way, and nothing would be more tempting, trying on the temper. Good Watson, you always keep us flat-footed and on the ground, but we can hardly accept lumbago, since he was able to stand erect in a moment." "He was never in better health," said Bennet. "In fact, he was stronger than I have known him for years. But these are the facts, Mr. Holmes. It is a case which we can consult the police, and yet we are utterly at our wits' end as what to do. And we feel in some strange way that we are drifting towards disaster. Edith, Miss Presbury, feels as I do, that we cannot wait passively any longer." "It is certainly a curious and suggestive case. What do you think, Watson?" "Speaking as a medical man," said I, "it appears to be a case of an alienist. The old gentleman's cerebral processes were disturbed by the love affair. He made a journey abroad in the hope of breaking himself with a passion. His letters in the box may be connected in some other private transaction, a loan perhaps, or share certificates, which are in the box." "And the wolfhound, no doubt, disapproved of his financial bargain?" No, Watson, there has to be more than this. Now, I can only suggest..." What Holmes was about to suggest will never be known, for at this moment the door opened and a young lady was shown into the room. She appeared. Mr. Bennet sprang up with a cry and ran forward with his hands to meet those which he had herself outreached. "Edith, dear, nothing the matter, I hope?"
"I felt as if I must follow you. Oh, Jack, I've been so dreadfully frightened. It has been awful to be there alone."
"Mr. Holmes, this is the young lady I spoke of. This is my fiancée." "However, gradually coming to that conclusion, or not, Watson," Holmes answered with a smile. "I take it, Miss Presbury, that there is some fresh development in the case, and you thought we should know." Our new visitor, a bright, handsome girl of a conventional English type, smiled back at Holmes as she seated herself beside Mr. Bennet.
"When I found Mr. Bennet had left his hotel, I thought I should probably find him here. Of course, he had told me that he would consult you, but, oh, Mr. Holmes, can you do nothing for my poor father?"
"I have hopes, Miss Presbury, but this case is still obscure. Perhaps what you will have to say may throw some fresh light upon it."
"It was last night, Mr. Holmes. He had been very strange all day. I am sure that there are times when he has no recollection of what he does. He lives in a strange dream. Yesterday was such a day. It was not my father with whom I lived. His outward show was there, but it really was not he."
"Tell me what happened."
"I was awakened in the night by the dog barking most furiously. Poor Roy is chained now by the stable. I may say that I always did sleep with my door locked, for, as Jack, Mr. Bennet will tell you, we have all had a feeling of impending danger. My room is on the second floor. It happened that the blind was up at my window and there was bright moonlight outside. As I lay with my eyes fixed upon the square of night, listening to the frenzied barking of the dog, I was amazed to see my father's face looking in at me. Mr. Holmes, I nearly died of surprise and horror. There it was, pressed against the window pane, and one hand seemed to be raised as if to push up the window. If that window had opened, I think I should have gone mad. I was no delusion, Mr. Holmes. Don't deceive yourself by thinking so. I dare say it was 20 seconds or so that I lay paralyzed and watched the face. Then it vanished, but I could not. I could not spring out of the bed to look after it. I lay cold and shivering till morning. At breakfast he was sharp and fierce in manner, and made no allusion to the adventure of the night. Neither did I, but I gave an excuse for coming to town, and here I am."
Holmes looked thoroughly surprised at Miss Presbury's narrative. "My dear young lady, you say that your room is on the second floor. Is there a long ladder in the garden?"
"No, Mr. Holmes, that is the amazing part of it. There's no possible way of reaching the window, and yet here I was."
"And the date being September 5th, said Holmes. That certainly complicates matters." It was the young lady's turn to look surprised. "This is my second time that you have alluded to the date, Mr. Holmes," said Bennet. "Is it possible that it may have any bearing on the case?" "It is possible, very possible, and yet I have not my full material to present." "No, I assure you, it was quite a different line of thought. Probably you can leave your notebook with me, and I will check the dates. Now, I think, Watson, that our line of action is perfectly clear. This young lady has informed us, and I have the greatest confidence in her intuition, that her father remembers little or nothing which occurs upon certain dates. We will therefore call upon him as if he had given us an appointment on such a date. He will put it down as his own lack of memory. Thus we will open our campaign by having a good, close view of him." "That is excellent," said Mr. Bennet. "I warn you, however, that the professor is irascible and violent at times." Holmes smiled. There are reasons why we should come at once. Very cognate reasons, if my theories hold good. Tomorrow, Mr. Bennet, we will certainly see us in Camford. There is, if I remember right, an inn called the Checkers, where the port used to have an above mediocrity. And the linen was above reproach. I think, Watson, that our lot for the next few days might lie in the less pleasant places. Monday morning found us in our way to the famous university town. An easy effort on the part of Holmes, who had no routes to pull up, but one which involved frantic planning and hurrying on my part, as my practice was by this time not inconsiderable. Holmes made no allusion to the case until after we had deposited our suitcases at the ancient hostel of which he had spoken. I think, Watson, that we can catch the professor just before lunch. He lectures at 11 and should have an interval at home. What possible excuse could we have for calling? Holmes glanced at his notebook. There is a period of excitement upon August 26th. We will assume that he is a little hazy as to what he does at such times. If we insist that we are there by appointment, he will hardly venture to contradict us. Have you the effrontery necessary to put it through? We can but try. Excellent, Watson. Compound of the busy bee and excelsior. We can but try. The motto of the firm. A friendly native will surely guide us. Such a one as the back of a smart hansom swept us past the row of ancient colleges, and finally turning towards a tree-lined drive, pulling up at the door of a charming house, girt round with lawns and covered with purple wisteria. Professor Presbury was certainly surrounded with every sign, not only of comfort, but of luxury. Even as we pulled up and our grizzled head appeared at the front window, and we were aware of a keen pair of eyes which, under shaggy brows, which surveyed us through very large horn glasses. A moment later we were actually in the sanctum. A mysterious scientist whose vagaries had brought us from London was standing before us. There was certainly no sign of eccentricity either in his manner or appearance, for he was a portly, large-featured man, grave, tall, and frock-coated, with the dignity of bearing which a lecturer needs. His eyes were his most remarkable feature, keen, observant, and clever to the verge of cunning. He looked at our cards. Pray sit down, gentlemen. What can I do for you? Mr. Holmes smiled admirably. It was the question which I was about to put to you, Professor. Put to me? Possibly there is some mistake. I hear through the second person that Professor Presbury of Camford had need of my services. Oh, indeed. It seemed to me that there was a malicious sparkle in the intense grey eyes. You heard that, did you? May I ask the name of your informant? I'm sorry, Professor, but the matter was rather confidential. If I have made a mistake, there is no harm done. I can only express my regrets. Not at all. I wish you go further into the matter. It interests me. Have you any scrap of writing, any letter or telegram to bear out your assertion? No, unfortunately I do not. I presume that you do not go so far as to ascertain that I summoned you. I'd rather answer no questions, said Holmes. No, I dare say not, said the professor with asperity. However, that particular one can be answered very easily without your aid. He walked across the room and rang to the bell. Our London friend, Mr. Bennet, answered the call. Come in, Mr. Bennet. These two gentlemen have come from London under impression that they have been summoned. You handle all my correspondence. Have you any note or anything going on in a person named Holmes? No, sir, Bennet answered with a flush. Oh, that is conclusive, said the professor, glaring angrily at my companion. Now, sir, he leaned forward and with his two hands upon the table. It seems to me that your position is a very questionable one. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. I can only repeat that I am sorry that we have made a needless intrusion. Oddly enough, Mr. Holmes, the old man cried in a high, screaming voice, with extraordinary malignancy upon his face. He got between us and the door as he spoke, and he shook his two hands at us in furious passion. You can hardly get out of it that easily. His face convulsed, and he grinned, and he gibbered at us in senseless rage. I'm convinced that he should have had to fight our way out of the room if Mr. Bennet had not intervened. My dear Professor, he cried, consider your position. Consider the scandal at the university. Mr. Holmes is a well-known man. You cannot possibly treat him with such discourtesy. Sulkily at our host, if I may call him so, cleared his path to the door. We were glad to find ourselves outside the house and in the quiet of the tree-lined drive. Holmes seemed greatly amused by the episode. Our friend's nerves are somewhat out of order, said he. Perhaps our intrusion was a little crude, and yet we have gained that personal contact which I desired. But, dear me, Watson, he is surely at our heels. The villain still pursues us. There were sounds of running feet behind us, but it was, to my relief, not the formidable professor, but his assistant, who appeared around the curve of the drive. He came panting up to us. I'm so sorry, Mr. Holmes. I wish to apologize. My dear sir, there is no need. It is all in the way of the professor's professional experience. I've seen him in a more dangerous mood, but he grows more sinister. You can understand now why his daughter and I are alarmed, and yet his mind is perfectly clear. Too clear, said Holmes. That was my miscalculation. It is evident that his memory is much more reliable than I thought. By the way, can we, before we go, see the window of Miss Presbyteri's room? Mr. Bennet pushed his way through some of the shrubs, and we had a view of the side of the house. It's there, the second on the left. Dear me, it hardly seems accessible, and yet you will observe that there is a creeper tree below and a water pipe above, which will give some foothold. I cannot climb it myself, said Mr. Bennet. Very likely. It would certainly be a dangerous exploit for a normal man. There was one other thing I wish to tell you, Mr. Holmes. I have the address in London of a man to whom the professor writes. He seems to have written this morning, and I got it from his blotting paper. It is an ignoble position for a trusted secretary, but what else can I do? Holmes glanced at the paper and put it in his pocket. Doric. Curious names. Slavonic, I imagine. Well, it is an important link in the chain. We return to London this afternoon, Mr. Bennet. I see no good purpose to have served by our remaining. We cannot arrest the professor because he has done no crime, nor can we place him under constraint, for he cannot be proved to be mad. No action is yet possible. What on earth are we to do? A little patience, Mr. Bennet. Things will soon develop. Unless I am mistaken, next Tuesday may mark a crisis. Certainly, we shall be in Camford on that day. Meanwhile, the general position is undeniably unpleasant, and if Miss Pesbury can prolong her visits, well, that is easy. Then let us stay till we can assure her that all danger is past. Meanwhile, let him have his way and do not cross him. So long as he is in good humor, all is well. There he is, said Bennet in a startled whisper, looking between the branches, and he saw a tall, erect figure emerge from the door-hall and look around him. He stood leaning forward, his hands swinging straight before him, his head turning from side to side. The secretary, with his last wave, slipped off among the trees, and we saw him presently join his employer, the two entering the house together in what seemed to be an animated and even excited conversation. I expect the old gentleman has been putting two and two together, said Holmes, as we walked hotelwards. He struck me as having a particularly clear and logical brain, from the little I saw of him. Explosive, no doubt, but then from his point of view he was something to explode if two detectives were put on his track, and he suspects his own household of doing it. I rather fancy that friend Bennett is in it for an uncomfortable time. Holmes stopped at the post office and sent a telegram on our way. The answer reached us in this evening, and he tossed it across to me. Have visited the commercial road and seen Doric. Suave person, bohemian, elderly. Keeps large general store. Mercer. Mercer since your time, said Holmes. He is my general utility man who looks up routine business. It is important to know something about a man with whom our professor was to secretly correspond. His nationality connects up with the Prague visit. Thank goodness that something connects to something, I said. At present we seem to be faced by a long series of inexplicable incidents with no bearing upon each other. For example, what possible connection can there be between an angry wolfhound and a visit in Bohemia, or either of them a man crawling down the passage at night? As to your dates, that is the biggest mystification at all. Not to me. Holmes smiled and rubbed his hands. We were, I may say, seated in an old sitting room in an ancient hotel, with a bottle of the famous vintage of which Holmes had spoken on the table between us. Well now, let us take the dates first, said he, his fingertips together in his manner as if he were addressing a class. This excellent young man's diary shows that there were trouble upon July 2nd, and from then onwards it seems to have been 9-day intervals, with, so far as I remember, only one exception. Thus, the last outbreak upon Friday was on September 3rd, which also falls into the series, as did August 26th, which preceded it. This thing is beyond coincidence. I was forced to agree. Let us then form the provisional theory that every 9 days the professor takes some strong drug which has a passing but highly poisonous effect. His naturally violent nature is intensified by it. He learned to take this drug while he was in Prague, and is now supplied with a Bohemian intermediary in London. This all things hang together, Watson. But the dog, and the face in the window, the creeping man in the passage. Well, we have made a beginning. I should not expect any fresh developments until Tuesday. And meanwhile, we can only keep in touch with our friend Bennett and enjoy the amenities of this charming town. In the morning, Mr. Bennett slipped around to bring us the latest report. As Holmes had imagined, times had not been easy with him. Without exactly accusing him of being responsible for our presence, the professor had been very rough and rude in his speech, and evidently felt strong evidence. This morning he was quite himself again, however, and had delivered his usual brilliant lecture to the class. Apart from his queer fits, said Bennett, he was actually more energy and vitality than I can ever remember, nor was his brain ever clear. But it's not he. It's never the man whom we have known. I don't think you have anything to fear now for a week at least, Holmes answered. I'm a busy man, and Dr. Watson has his patients to attend to. Let us agree that we will meet here at this hour next Tuesday, and I shall be surprised if, before we leave you again, we will not be able to explain, even if we cannot perhaps put an end to your troubles. Meanwhile, keep us posted in what occurs. I saw nothing of my friend for the next few days, but on the following Monday evening I had a short note asking to meet me with him at the train the next day. From what he told me as we travelled up to Camford, all was well. The peace of the professor's house had been unruffled, and his own conduct perfectly normal. This also was a report which had given us by Mr. Bennett himself when we called upon us that evening at our old quarters of the Checkers. He heard from his London correspondent today. There was a letter and there was a small packet, each with a cross under the stamp, which warned me not to touch them. There has been nothing else. That may prove quite enough, said Holmes grimly. "Now, Mr. Bennet, we shall, I think, come to some conclusion tonight. If my deductions are correct, we should have an opportunity of bringing matters to a head. In order to do so, it is necessary to hold the professor under observation. I would suggest, therefore, that you remain awake and on lookout. Should you hear him pass your door, do not interrupt him, but follow him as discreetly as you can. Dr. Watson and I will not be far off. By the way, where is the key of the little box of which you spoke of?" "Upon his watch chain." "I fancy our researches must lie in that direction. At the worst, the lock should not be very formidable. Have you any other able-bodied men on the premises?" "There's the coachman, MacPhail." "Where does he sleep?" "Over the stables." "We might possibly want him. Well, we can do no more until we see how things develop. Goodbye, but I expect that we shall see you before morning." It was nearly midnight before we took our station among some bushes immediately opposite the hall door of the professor. It was a fine night, but chilly, and we were glad for our warm overcoats. There was a breeze, and clouds were scuttling across the sky, obscuring from time to time the half-moon. It would have been a dismal vigil were it not for the expectation and excitement which carried us along, and the assurance of my comrade that we had probably reached the end of a strange sequence of events which had engaged our attention. "If the cycle of 9 days holds good, then we shall have the professor at his worst tonight," said Holmes. "The fact that these strange symptoms began after his visit to Prague, that he is in secret correspondence with a Bohemian dealer in London, who presumably represents someone in Prague, and that he received a packet from him this very day, all point in one direction. What he takes and why he takes it are still beyond our ken, but that emanates in some form Prague is clear enough. He takes it under definite directions which regulate his ninth-day system, which is the first point which attracted my attention. But his symptoms are most remarkable. Did you observe his knuckles?" "I had to confess that I had not." "Thick and horny, in a way which is quite new to my experience. Always look at the hands first, Watson, then cuffs, then trouser knees, then boots. Very curious knuckles, which can be only explained by a mode of progression observed by—" Holmes paused, and then suddenly clapped his hand to his forehead. "Oh, Watson, what a fool have I been! It seems incredible, and yet it is to be true. All points in one direction. How could I miss seeing the connection of ideas? Those knuckles, how could it have been past those knuckles? And the dog, and the ivy. It's surely time I disappeared into that little farm of my dreams. Look now, Watson, here he is. We shall have the chance of seeing for ourselves." The hall door had opened slowly, and against the lamp-lit background we saw the tall figure of Professor Presbury. He was clad in his dressing gown. He stood outlined in the doorway, as erect but leaning forward with dangling arms, when we saw him at last. Now he stepped forward onto the drive, and an extraordinary change came over him. He sank down into a crouching position and moved along his hands and feet, skipping every now and then as if he were overflowing with energy and vitality. He moved along the face of the house and then around to the corner. As he disappeared, Bennet slipped through the hall door and softly followed us. "Come, Watson, come," cried Holmes, as we stole softly as we could through the bushes until we at last gained a spot whence we could see the other side of the house, which was bathed in the light of the half-moon. The professor was clearly crouching at the door on the floor covered with ivy wall. As we watched him, he suddenly began the incredible agility and ascended it. From branch to branch he sprang, sure of foot and firm of grasp, climbing apparently in mere joy of his own powers, with no definite object in view. With his dressing gown flapping on each side of him, he looked like some huge bat glued against the side of his own house, a great square dark patch upon the moonlit wall. Presently he tired of his amusement, and dropped from branch to branch. He squatted down in the old attitude and moved towards the stables. creeping along slowly in the same strange way as he did before. The wolfhound was out now, barking furiously, and more excited than ever when it actually caught sight of its master. It was straining on its chains and quivering with eagerness and rage. The professor squatted down just deliberately out of reach of the hound, and began to provoke it in every possible way. He took handfuls of pebbles from the driver and threw them at the dog's face, prodded him with the stick which he had picked up, flicked his hands about a few inches from the gaping mouth, and endeavored in every way to increase the animal's fury, which was already beyond all control. In all our adventures, I do not know that I have ever seen a more strange sight than this impassive and still dignified figure crouching frog-like upon the ground and goading to a wilder exhibition of passion the maddened hound, which raged and ramped in front of him by all manner of ingenious and calculated cruelty. And then it happened in a moment. It was not the chain that broke, but it was the collar that slipped, for it had been made of a thick-necked Newfoundland. We heard a little rattle of falling metal, and in an instant the dog and man were rolling on the ground together, one roaring in rage and the other screaming in a strange shrill falsetto of terror. It was a very narrow thing for the professor's life. The savage creature had laid him fairly by the throat, its fangs had bitten deep, and he was senseless before he could reach the dog and drag the two apart. It might have been a dangerous task for us, but Bennett's voice and the presence brought the great wolfhound instantly to reason. The uproar had brought the sleepy and astonished coachman from his room above the stables. "I'm not surprised," he said, shaking his head. "I've seen him at it before. I knew the dog would get him sooner or later." The hound was secured, and together we carried the professor up to his room, where Bennett, who had a medical degree, helped me dress his torn throat. The sharp teeth had passed dangerously close to the carotid artery, and the hemorrhage was serious. In half an hour the danger was past. I had given the patient an injection of morphia, and he had sunk into a deep sleep. Then, and only then, were we able to look at each other and take stock of the situation. "I think a first-class surgeon should see him," said I. "Oh, for God's sake, no," cried Bennett. "At present the scandal is confirmed to our own household. It is safe with us. If he gets beyond these walls, it will never stop. Consider his position at the university, his European reputation, the feelings of his daughter." "Quite so," said Holmes. "I think it may be quite possible to keep the matter to ourselves, and also to prevent the recurrence now that we have a free hand. The key from the watch chain, Mr. Bennett. MacPhail will guard the patient and let us know if there's any change. Let us see what we have to find in the professor's mysterious box." There was not much, but it was there enough. An empty vial, another nearly full, a hypodermic syringe, several letters in crabbed foreign hand. The marks on the envelope showed that they were those which had disturbed the routine of the secretary, and each was dated from the Commercial Road and signed A. Dorak. They were the mere invoices to say that a fresh bottle was being sent to Professor Presbury, or receipts of acknowledgment of money. There was one other envelope, however, in a more educated hand, and bearing the Austrian stamp which the postage of Prague. "Here is your material," cried Holmes as he tore open the enclosure. "Honored colleague," it ran, "since your esteemed visits I have thought much of your case, and though in your circumstances there are some special reasons for the treatment, I would none the less enjoin in caution, as my results have shown that it is not without danger of a kind. It is possible that the serum of anthropoid would have been better. I have, as I explained to you, used black-faced langur because the specimen was accessible. Langur is, of course, a crawler and a climber, while anthropoid walks erect, and is in all ways nearer. I beg you to take every possible precaution that there is no premature revelation of this process. I have one other client in England, and Orvac is my agent for both. Weekly reports will oblige. Yours, with high esteem, H. Lowenstein. Lowenstein. That name brought back to me a memory of the snippets of some newspaper which spoke of an obscure scientist who is striving in some unknown way for a secret of rejuvenations and the elixir of life. Lowenstein of Prague. Lowenstein with his wondrous strength-giving serum, tabooed by the profession because he refused to reveal its source. In a few words I said what I remembered. Bennett had taken the manual of zoology from the shelves. Lange, he said, read, "The great black-faced monkey of the Himalayan slopes, biggest and most human of climbing monkeys." Many details were added. Well, thank you, Mr. Holmes. It is very clear that we have traced the evil to its source. The real source, said Holmes, lies, of course, in that the untimely affair which gave our impetuous professor the idea that he could gain his wish of turning himself into a younger man. When one tries to rise above nature, one is liable to fall below it. The highest type of man may revert to the animal if he leaves the straight road of destiny. He sat musing for a little, with the vial in his hand, looking at the clear liquid within. When I have written to this man and told him that I could hold him criminally responsible for the poisons which he circulates, we will have no more trouble. But it may recur. Others may find a better way. There is a danger here, a very real danger to humanity. Consider, Watson, that the material, the sensual, the worldly would all prolong the worthless lives. The spiritual would not avoid the call to something higher. It would be the survival of the least fit. What sort of cesspool may not our poor world become? Suddenly the dreamer disappeared, and Holmes, the man of action, sprang from his chair. I think there is nothing more to be said, Mr. Bennet. The various incidents will now fit themselves easily into the general scheme. The dog, of course, was aware of the change far more quickly than you. His smell would ensure that. It was the monkey, not the professor, whom Roy attacked, just as it is the monkey who teased Roy. Climbing was a joy to the creature, and it is a mere chance, I take it, that the pastime brought him to the young lady's window. There's an early train to town, Watson, but I think we shall have just enough time for a cup of tea at the Checkers before we catch it. Holmes indeed got into some monkey business. Thank you for the look, Fred. Thank you for the hydrate, Guilty. I did take a sip while I was doing that. So. Oh. Whew. Okay, I'm going to throw the ads up before they hit themselves again, because those ads came way before they should have, and I could not get them in time to skip it. So, or they came right on time. I don't know, we've been going an hour and 11 minutes, roughly. Oh, well, glad you're... blow my nose real quick, so I'm going to mute it. Okay, I'm going to run those ads just so I can get some sanity. Gotta get my second cup. So, I hope everyone had a good Turkey Day. If you celebrated it, because I know not everyone that comes in here is American. American! And hopefully none of you are Americans, because Americans are, well, you can look it up, kids. How long is the next story? The next story is Adventure of the Lion's Mane. How long is it? Adventure of the Lion's Mane is 21 pages. Creeping Man was 23, so this will be a little shorter, but not by much. Yeah, so wait until the ads are done, then I'm going to get into it. It's strange. I did not put last week's videos in my highlights, but they do highlight them, so. Get to that and see if I can fix that. It out. Oh, I only did the one and it was an hour long. That's why. Okay. Add to collections. No, it says it's already there. Did I miss one? That's November 9th. So 14th, 21st. No, good. Oh well. Rebecca Meds. None of my timers are working, so looks like we're back. Okay, should be back from that. Let's get into our second adventure for the evening. And as I said earlier, the second one is The Adventure of the Lion's Mane. It is the most singular thing that the problem, which was certainly as abstruse and unusual as any which I have faced in my long professional career, should have come to me after my retirement, and be brought, as it were, to my very door. Oh, wait. I'm doing this wrong. This is actually done by Holmes, so I'll have to do it in his voice. I'm used to Watson. I always have to make sure that I have a good thing. So, let's start over, shall we? Wait, give an option on it. I'm starting over. The Adventure of the Lion's Mane. It is a most singular thing that the problem, which was certainly as abstruse and unusual as any which I have faced in my long professional career, should have come to me after my retirement, and be brought, as it were, to my very door. It occurred after my withdrawal to my little Sussex home, when I had given myself up entirely to that soothing life of nature for which I had often yearned during my long years spent amid the gloom of London. At this period of my life, the good Watson had passed almost beyond my ken. An occasional week-end visit was just the most that I ever saw of him. Thus I must act as my own chronicler. Had he but been with me, how much he might have made of so wonderful a happening, and of my eventual triumph against every difficulty. As it is, however, I must needs tell my own tale in my own plain way, showing by my words each step upon the difficult road which may lie before me as I searched for the mystery of the lion's mane. My villa is situated upon the southern slope of the Downs, commanding a great view of the Channel. At this point, the coastline is entirely of chalk cliffs, which can only be descended by a long, single, tortuous path, which is steep and slippery. At the bottom of this path lie 100 yards of pebbles and shingles, even when the tide is full. Here and there, however, there are curves and hollows which make splendid swimming pools, filled afresh with each flow. This admirable beach extends for some miles in each direction, save only at one point where the little cove of village of Falsworth break the line. My house is lonely. I, my old housekeeper, and my bees have the estate all to ourselves. Half a mile off, however, is Harold Stackhurst's well-known coaching establishment, the Gables, quite a large place, which contains some score of young fellows preparing for various professions, with a staff of several masters. Stackhurst himself was a well-known rowing blue in his day, and an excellent all-around scholar. He and I were always friendly from the day I came to the coast, but he was the one man who was on such terms with me as that we could drop in on each other in the evenings without an invitation. Towards the end of July 1907, there was a severe gale, and the wind blowing up channel, heaping the seas to the base of the cliffs, and leaving the lagoon at the turn of the tide. On the morning of which I speak, the wind was abated, and all nature was newly washed and fresh. It was impossible to work upon such a delightful day, and I strolled out before breakfast to enjoy the exquisite air. I walked along the cliff path which led to a steep descent to the beach. As I walked, I heard a shout behind me, and there was Harold Stackhurst, waving his hand in cheery greeting. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes. I thought I should see you out." "Going for a swim, I see." "At your old tricks," he laughed, patting his bulging pockets. "Yes, Macpherson started early, and I expect I may find him there." Fitzroy Macpherson was a science master, a fine, upstanding young fellow whose life had been crippled by heart trouble following rheumatic fever. He was a natural athlete, however, and excelled in every game which he did not throw too great a strain upon him. Winter and summer he went for a swim, and as I am a swimmer myself, I have often joined him. At this moment we saw the man himself. His head showed above the edge of the cliff where the path ends. Then his whole figure appeared at the top, staggering like a drunken man. The next instant he threw up his hands, and, with a terrible cry, fell upon his face. Stackhurst and I rushed forward. It may have been 50 yards, and turned him on his back. He was obviously dying. Those glazed, sunken eyes and dreadful livid cheek could mean nothing else. One glimmer of life came into his face for an instant, and he uttered 2 or 3 words with an eager air of warning. They were slurred and indistinct, but to my ear the last of them, which burst in a shriek from his lips, were, "The lion's mane." It was uttered irrelevant and unintelligible, but I could twist the sound into no other sense. Then he half raised himself from the ground, threw his arms into the air, and fell forward on his side. He was dead. My companion was paralyzed by the sudden horror of it, but I, as may well be imagined, had every sense on the alert, and I had need, for it was speedily evident that we were in the presence of an extraordinary case. The man was dressed only in his Burberry overcoat, his trousers, and an unlaced pair of canvas shoes. As he fell over, his Burberry, which had been simply thrown around his shoulders, slipped off, exposing his trunk. We stared in amazement. His back was covered with dark red lines, as though he had been terribly flogged by a thin wire scourge. The instrument with which this punishment had been inflicted was clearly flexible, for long, angry wheels curved around his shoulders and ribs. There was blood dripping down his chin, for he had bitten through his lower lip with the paroxysm of his agony. His drawn and distorted face told how terrible the agony had been. I was kneeling and Stacker standing by the body when a shadow fell across us, and we found that Ian Murdoch was by our side. Murdoch was the mathematical coach at the establishment, a tall, dark, thin man, so taciturn and aloof that none can be said to have been his friend. He seemed to live in some high abstract region of surds and conic sections with little connected to him with ordinary life. He was looking upon us an oddity by the students, and would have been their butt, but there was some strange outlandish blood in the man, which showed itself not only in his coal black eyes and swarthy face, but also in the occasional outbreaks of temper, which could only be described as ferocious. On one occasion, being plagued by a little dog belonging to Macpherson, he had caught the creature up and hurled it through a plate-glass window, an action for which Stackhurst would certainly have given him his dismissal had he not been a very valuable teacher. Such was the strange, complex man who now appeared beside us. He seemed to be honestly shocked at the sight before him, though the incident of the dog may show that there was no great sympathy between the dead man and himself. "Why, poor fellow, what can you do? How can I help?" "Were you with him? Can you tell us what happened?" No, I was late this morning. I was not at the beach at all. I've come straight from the Gables. What can I do?" "You can hurry to the police station at Fulworth. Report the matter at once." Without a word, he made off at top speed, and I proceeded to take the matter in hand, while Stackhurst, dazed at this tragedy, remained by the body. My first task, naturally, was to note who was on the beach. From the top of the path I could see the whole sweep of it, and it was absolutely deserted, save for that 2 or 3 dark figures, which would have been seen far away, moving towards the village of Fulworth. Having satisfied myself upon the point, I walked slowly down the path. There was clay and soft marl mixed with the chalk, and every here and there I saw the same footstep, both ascending and descending. No one else had gone down to the beach by this track this morning. At one place I observed the print of an open hand with the fingers toward an incline. This could only mean that poor Macpherson had fallen as he ascended. There were some rounded depressions, too, which suggested that he had come down on his knees more than once. At the bottom of the path was a considerable lagoon left by the retreating tide. At the sight of it, Macpherson had undressed, for there lay his towel upon a rock. It was folded and dry, so that it would seem that after all he had never entered the water. Once or twice, as I hunted round amid the hard shingle, I came upon little patches of sand where the print of his canvas shoe, and also of his naked foot, could be seen. The latter fact proved that he had made it all the way to the bath, though the towel indicated that he had not already done so. Here and there was the problem clearly defined, as strange as one had ever confronted me. The man had not been on the beach more than a quarter of an hour at the most. Stackhurst had followed him from the Gables, so there was no doubt that he had gone to bathe and had stripped, as was the naked footprints showing. Then he had suddenly huddled on his clothes again, as they were all disheveled and unfastened, and he had returned without bathing, or at least, any rate, without drying himself. The reason of this change for purpose had been that he had been scourged by some savage, inhuman fashion, tortured until he bit his lip through in his agony, and was left with only strength to crawl away and die. Who had done this barbarous deed? There were, it is true, small grottos and caves at the base of the cliffs, but the low sun shone directly into them, and there was no place for concealment. Then again, there were those distant figures on the beach. They seemed too far away to have connected with this crime, and the broad lagoon in which McPherson had intended to bathe lay between him and them, lapping up to the rocks. On the sea, 2 or 3 fishing boats were at no great distance. The occupants might have examined at their leisure. There were several roads of inquiry, but none of which led to the obvious goal. When I had last returned to the body, I found that the little group was wandering folk had gathered around it. Stackhurst was, of course, still there, and Ian Murdoch had just arrived with Anderson, the village constable, a big, ginger-moustached man with the slow, solid Sussex breed, a breed which covers most of the good sense under a heavy, silent exterior. He listened to everything and took note of all we said, and finally drew me aside. "I'll be glad of your advice, Mr. Holmes. This is a big thing for me to handle, and I'll hear of it from Lewis if I go wrong." I advised him to send for his immediate superior and for a doctor, also to allow nothing to be moved and a few fresh footmarks as possible to be made until they came. In the meantime, I searched the dead man's pockets. There were his handkerchief, a large knife, and a small folding card case. From this projected a slip of paper, which I unfolded and handed to the constable. There was written on it in scrawling feminine hand, "I will be there, you may be sure, Maudie." It read like a love affair, an assassination, though when and where were a blank. The constable replaced it in the hard case and returned it with the other things from the pockets of the Burberry. Then, as nothing more suggested itself, I walked back to my house for breakfast, having first arranged that the base of the cliff should be thoroughly searched. Stackhurst was round in an hour or two to tell me the body had been removed to the Gables, where the inquest could be held. He brought with him some serious and definite news. As I expected, nothing had been found in the small caves below the cliff, but he had examined the papers in McPherson's desk, and there were several which showed an intimate correspondence with a certain Miss Maud Bellamy of Fulworth. We had then established the identity of the writer of the note. "The police have the letters," he explained, "but I could not bring them. But there is no doubt of the serious love affair. I see no reason, however, to connect it with the horrible happenings. Indeed, that the lady may have made an appointment with him. But hardly at the bathing pool, which all of you were in the habit of using," I remarked. "It is mere chance," said he, "that several of the students were not with McPherson." Was it mere chance? Stackhurst nicked his eyes and thought. Ian Murdoch held them back, he said. He would insist upon some algebraic demonstration before breakfast. Poor chap, he's dreadful cut-up about it. And yet I gather that they were not friends. At one time they were not, but for a year or more Murdoch has been as near to McPherson as ever could be to anyone. He is not of a very sympathetic disposition by nature. So I understand. I seem to remember your telling me once about a quarrel over ill usage of a dog. That blew over all right. But left some vindictive feeling, perhaps? No, I'm sure they were real friends. Oh, then, we must explore the matter of the girl. Do you know her? Everyone knows her. She's the beauty of the neighborhood. A real beauty, Holmes, who would draw attention everywhere. I knew that McPherson was attracted to her, but I had no indication that it had gone so far that these letters would seem to indicate. But who is she? She's the daughter of old Todd Bellamy, who owns all the boats and bathing cots at Fulworth. He was a fisherman to start with, but now a man of some substance. He and his son William were in the business. Shall we walk to Fulworth and see them? On what pretext? Oh, we can easily find a pretext. After all, this poor man did not ill-use himself in an outrageous way. Some human hand was on the handle of that scourge, if indeed it was the scourge which inflicted the injuries. His circle of acquaintances in this lonely place was surely limited. Let us follow it up in every direction, and we can hardly fail to come to some motive, which in turn should lead us to the criminal. It would have been a pleasant walk across the time-seasoned downs had our minds not been poisoned by the tragedy we had witnessed. The village of Fulworth lies in a hollow curving in a semicircle around the bay. Behind the old-fashioned hamlet, several modern houses had been built upon the rising ground. It was to one of these that the Stackhurst guided me. That's the Haven, as Bellamy calls it, the one of the corner tower with the slate roof. Not bad for a man who started with nothing, but by Jove, look at that. The garden of the Haven had opened and the man had emerged. There was no mistaking that tall, angular, straggling figure. It was Ian Murdoch, the mathematician. A moment later we confronted him with the road. "Hello," said Stackholm. The man nodded and gave us a sideways glance from his curious dark eyes, and would have passed us, but his principal pulled him up. "What are you doing over here?" he asked. Murdoch's face flushed with anger. "I'm your subordinate, sir, under your roof, but I'm not aware that I owe you my account of my private actions." Stackhurst's nerves were near the surface after all he had endured. Otherwise, perhaps, he would have waited. Now he lost his temper completely. "In the circumstances, your answer is pure impudence, Mr. Murdoch. Your own question might perhaps come under the same heading. This is not the first time that I've had to overlook your insubordinate ways. It will certainly be the last. You will kindly make fresh arrangements for your future as speedily as you can." I had intended to do so. I have lost today the only person who made the gables habitable. He strode away on his way off, while Stackhurst, with angry eyes, stood glaring after him. "Is he not impossible, intolerable man?" he cried. The one thing has impressed itself forcibly upon my friend. "So I would, Father, if you would ever shown sympathy. I object to my... Hold on. Was that Ian McMurdoch who, talking the first chance to open the path to the crime of the scene of the crime? Suspicions, vague and nebulous, was now beginning to take outline in my mind. Perhaps the visits of the Bellamys might throw some further light upon the matter. Stackhurst pulled himself together, and we went forward to the house. Mr. Bellamy proved to be a middle-aged man with a flaming red beard. He seemed to be in a very angry mood, and his face was soon as florid as his hair. "Now, sir, I do not desire any particulars. My son here," indicating the powerful young man with heavy, sullen face in the corner of the sitting-room, "is of one mind with me that Mr. Macpherson's intentions to Maud were insulting. Yes, sir, the word marriage was never mentioned, and yet there were letters and meetings and a great deal more which neither of us would approve. She has no mother, and we are all her guardians. We are determined—" But the words were taken from his mouth by the appearance of the lady herself. There was no gainsaying that she would have graced any assembly in the world. Who could have imagined that such a rare flower would grow from such a root in such an atmosphere? Women have seldom been an attraction to me, for my brain has always governed my heart. But I could not look upon her perfect, clear-cut face, with all the soft freshness of the downlands in her delicate coloring, without realizing that no young man would cross her path unscathed. Such was a girl who had pushed open the door and stood now, wide-eyed and intense, in front of Harold Stackhurst.
"I already know that Fitzroy is dead," she said. "Do not be afraid to tell me the particulars."
"This other gentleman of yours let us know the news," explained the father. "There is no reason why my sister should be brought into the matter," growled the younger man. The sister turned a sharp, fierce gaze upon him.
"This is my business, William. Kindly leave me to manage it my own way. By all accounts there has been a crime committed. If I can help to show who did it, it is the least I can do for him who is gone." She listened to the short account from my companion, with a composed concentration which showed me that she possessed a strong character as well as a great beauty. Maud Bellamy will always remain in my memory as the most complete and remarkable woman. It seems that she already knew me by sight, for she turned to me at the end. "Bring them to justice, Mr. Holmes. You have my sympathy and my help, whoever they may be."
It seemed to me that she glanced defiantly at her father and brother as she spoke. "Thank you," I said. "I value a woman's instinct in such matters. You use the word they. You think there is more than one person concerned?"
I knew Macpherson well enough to be aware that he was a brave and strong man. No single person could have done such inflicted an outrage upon him.
"Might I have a word with you alone?" "I tell you, Maud, you ought to fix yourself up in this matter," cried her father angrily. She looked at me helplessly.
"What can I do?"
"The whole world will know the facts presently, so there can be no harm if I discuss them here," said I. "I should have preferred privacy, but if your father will not allow it, he must share the deliberations." Then I spoke out of the note which had been found in the dead man's pocket. "It is sure to be produced in an inquest. Might I ask you to throw any light upon it that you can?"
"I see no reason for mystery," she answered. "We were engaged to be married, and we only kept it secret because Fitzroy's uncle, who was very old and said to be dying, might have disinherited him if he were married against his wish. There's no other reason."
"You could have told us," growled Mr. Bellamy.
"So I would, Father, if you had ever shown sympathy."
"I object to my girl picking up with men outside her own station."
"It was your prejudice against him which prevented us from telling you. As disappointment—"
She fumbled in her dress and produced a crumpled note. It was an answer to this. "Dearest," ran the message, "the old place on the beach just after sunset on Tuesday. It is the only time I can get away. F.M."
Tuesday was today, and I had meant to meet him tonight.
I turned over the paper. This never came by post. How did you get it?"
I would rather not answer that question. It was really nothing to do with the matter which you are investigating, but if anything bears upon it, I will answer most freely.
She was good to her word, but there was nothing which was helpful in our investigation. She had no reason to think that her fiancé had any hidden enemy, but she admitted that she had had several warm admirers. "May I ask if Mr. Ian Murdoch was one of them?" She blushed and seemed confused.
There was a time wherein I thought he was, but that was all changed when he understood the relationship between Fitzroy and myself.
Again the shadow around the strange man seemed to me to be taking more definite shape. His record must be examined. His rooms must be privately searched. Stackhurst was a willing collaborator, for in his mind all suspicions were forming. We returned from our visit to the Haven with the hope that one free end of this tangled skein had already been in hands. A week passed. The inquest had thrown no light upon the matter, and we had adjourned for further evidence. Stackhurst had made his discreet inquiry about his subordinate, and there was a significant superficial search of his room, but without result. Personally, I had gone over the whole ground again, both physically and mentally, but with no new conclusions. In all my chronicles, the reader will find no case which brought me so completely to the limit of my power. Even my imagination could conceive no solution to this mystery. And then there came to the incident of the dog. It was my old housekeeper who heard of it first by the strange wireless by which such people collect news in the countryside.
"Sad story this is, sir, about Mr. Macpherson's dog,"
as she said one evening. I did not encourage such conversations, but the words arrested my attention. "What of Macpherson's dog?"
"Dead, sir. Died of grief from its master."
"Who told you this?"
"Why, sir, everyone's talking about it. It took on terrible and has eaten nothing for a week. Then today 2 of the young gentlemen from the Gables found it dead, down on the beach, sir, at the very place where its master had met his end."
At the very place? Words stood clear in my memory. Some dim perception that the matter was vital rose in my mind. That the dog should die was after a beautiful, faithful nature of dogs. But In the very place. Why should this lonely beach be fatal to it? Was it possible that it had also been sacrificed by some revengeful feud? Was it possible? Yes, the perception was dim, but already something was building up in my mind. In a few minutes I was on my way to the Gables, where I found Stackhurst in his study. At my request he sent for the Sudsbury and Blount, the two students who found the dog. Yeah, it lay on the very edge of the pool, said one of them. It must have followed the trail of its dead master. I saw the little fertile creature, an Airedale terrier, laid out upon the mat in the hall. The body was stiff and rigid, its eyes projecting, and its limbs contorted. There was agony in every line of it. From the Gables I walked down to the bathing pool. The sun had sunk and the shadow of the great cliff lay back across the water, which glimmered dully like a sheet of lead. The place was deserted, and there was no sign of life save for two seabirds circling and screaming overhead. In the fading light I could dimly make out the little dog's spoor upon the land, on sea sand around the very rock which its master's trowel had led. For a long time I stood in deep meditation while the shadows grew darker around me. My mind was filled with racing thoughts. You have known what it is to be in a nightmare when you feel that there is some all-important thing for which you search or which you know is there, though it remains forever just beyond your reach. That was how I felt that evening as I stood alone on the place of death. Then at last I turned and walked slowly homewards. I had just reached the top of the path when it came to me. Like a flash, I remembered the thing for which I had so eagerly and vainly grasped. You will know, or Watson has written in vain, that I hold a vast store of out-of-the-way knowledge without scientific system, but the very availability for the needs for my work. My mind is like a crowded box room with packages of all sorts strewn about therein, so many that I may well have put a vague perception on what was there. I had known that there was something which might bear upon the matter. It was vague, but at least I knew how I could make it clear. It was monstrous, incredible, and yet it was always possibility. I would test it to the full. There was a great garret in my little house which was stuffed full of books. It was into this that I plunged and rummaged for an hour. At the end of that time I emerged with a little chocolate and silver volume. I eagerly turned up the chapter which I had in remembrance. Yes, it was indeed far-fetched and unlikely proposition, and yet I could not rest until I had made sure I might indeed be so. It was late when I retired, with my mind eagerly awaiting the work tomorrow. But that work met with an annoying interruption. I had hardly swallowed my early cup of tea and was starting for the beach when I had heard a call from Inspector Bottle of Sussex Constabulary, a steady, solid, bovine man with thoughtful eyes, which looked at me now with a very troubled expression. "I know your immense experience, sir," said he. "This is quite unofficial, of course, and need go no further. But I'm fairly up against it with this McPherson case. The question is, shall I make an arrest or shall I not?" "Meaning Mr. Ian Murdoch?" "Yes, sir. There's really no one else that can come close to think of it. That's the advantage of the solitude. We narrow it down to a very small compass. If he did not do it, then who did?" "What have you got against him?" It gleaned along the same furrows I had. There was Murdoch's character and the mystery which seemed to hang around the man. His furious bursts of temper, as shown in the incident of the dog. The fact that he had quarrelled with Macpherson in the past, and there was some reason to think that he might be resented his attentions to Miss Bellamy. He had all my points, but fresh ones. Save that Murdoch seemed to be making every preparation for departure. What would my position be if I let him slip away with all this evidence against him? The burly, phlegmatic man said, sorely troubled in his hand. "Consider," I said, "all the essential gaps in your case. On the morning of the crime, he can surely prove his alibi. He had been with his scholars till the last moment, and within a few minutes of Macpherson's appearance he came upon us from behind. Then bear in mind the absolute impossibility that he could have single-handedly been inflicted such outrage upon a man quite as strong as himself. Finally, there is a question of this instrument of which these injuries were inflicted. What could it be but a scourge or flexible whip of some sort? Have you examined the marks? I asked. I've seen them, so has the doctor. But I have examined them very carefully with a lens. They have peculiarities. What are they, Mr. Holmes? I stepped to my bureau and brought out a large photograph. This is my method in such cases, I explained. You certainly do things thoroughly, Mr. Holmes. I should hardly be what I am if I did not. Now let us consider the wheel which extends round the right shoulder. Do you observe nothing remarkable? I can't say that I do. Surely it is evident that it is unequal to its intensity. There is a dot of exacerbated blood here, and another there. There are smaller indications that this other wheel down here. What can that mean? I have no idea. Have you? Perhaps I have. Perhaps I haven't. I may be able to say more soon. Anything which will define what made that mark will bring us a long way towards the criminal. It is, of course, an absurd idea, said the policeman. But if a red-hot net of wire had been laid across the back, and these better marked spots would represent where the meshes cross the other. A most ingenious comparison. Or shall we say a very stiff cat of nine tails with small hard knots upon it. By Jove, Mr. Holmes, I think you've hit it. Or there may be some very different cause, Mr. Bartle. But your case is far too weak for an arrest. Besides, we have those last words. Lion's mane. I've wondered whether Ian... Yes, I've considered that. But the second word had borne any resemblance to Murdoch. But it did not. It gave almost in a shriek, but I am quite sure that it was Maine. Have you no alternatives, Mr. Holmes? Perhaps I have, but I do not care to discuss it until there is something more solid to discuss. And when will that be? In an hour. Probably this. The inspector rubbed his chin and looked at me with dubious eyes. I wish I could see what was in your mind, Mr. Holmes. Perhaps it's those fishing boats. No, they are too far out. Well, then, is it Bellamy and his big son that did it? They were not too sweet on Mr. McPherson. Could they have done him a mischief? No, you won't draw me in until I'm ready. I said with a smile, Now, Inspector, we each have our own work to do. Perhaps if you were to meet me here at midday. So far we had gotten when there had been a tremendous interruption, which was the beginning of the end. My outer door was flung open, and there were blundering footsteps in the passage, and Ian Murdoch staggered in the room, pallid, disheveled, his clothes in wild disorder, clawing on his bony hands in the furniture, and hold himself erect. Brandy! He gasped, and fell groaning upon the sofa. He was not alone. Behind him came Stackhurst, hatless and panting, almost as distraught as his companion. Yes, brandy, he cried. The man is at his last gasp. It was all I could think to bring him here. He fainted twice upon the way. Half a tumbler of the raw spirits brought about a wondrous change. He pushed himself up on one arm and swung his coat from his shoulders. For God's sake, opium, oil, morphia, he cried. Anything to ease this infernal agony. The inspector and I cried out at the sight. There, crisscrossed upon the man's naked shoulder, were the same strange, reticulated pattern of red, inflamed lines which had been the death mark of Fitzroy Macpherson. The pain was evidently terrible, and was more than local, for the sufferer's breathing would stop for a time, His face would turn black, and then with loud gasps he would clap his hands to his heart, while his brow dropped beads of sweat. At any moment he might die. More and more brandy was poured down his throat, and each fresh dose bringing him back to life. Pads of cotton wool were soaked in salad oil, seems to take away the agony of the strange wounds. At last his head fell heavily upon the cushion. Exhausted nature had taken refuge in his last storehouse of vitality. It was half asleep, half a faint, but at least it was an ease from pain. To question him had been impossible, but the moment we were assured of his condition, Stackhurst turned upon me. "Good God, Holmes," he cried, "what is it?" "Where did you find him?" "Down on the beach, exactly where poor Macpherson met his end. If this man's heart had been as weak as Macpherson's was, he would not be here now. More than once I thought he was done as I brought him up. It was too far to the gable, so I made for you." "Did you see him on the beach?" "I was walking on the cliff when I heard his cry. He was at the edge of the water, reeling about like a drunken man. I ran for him, threw some clothes about him, and brought him up. For heaven's sake, Holmes, use all the powers you have and spare no pains to lift this curse from this place. For life is becoming endurable. Can you, with all your worldwide reputation, do nothing for us?" "I think I can, Stockhurst. Come with me now, and you, Inspector, come along. We will see if you cannot deliver this murder into your hands." Leaving the unconscious man in the charge of my housekeeper, we all three went down to the deadly lagoon. On the shingle there was piled the little heap of towels and clothes left from the stricken man. Slowly I walked around the edge of the water, my comrades in Indian file behind me. Most of the pool was quite shallow, but under the cliff where the beach was hollowed out, it was 5 feet deep. It was to this part that a swimmer would naturally go, for it formed a beautiful, peculiar green pool, as clear as crystal. A line of rocks lay above it at the base of the cliff, and along this I led the way, peering eagerly into the depths beneath me. I had reached the deepest and stillest pool when my eyes caught that which they were searching for, and I burst into a shout of triumph. "Saina!" I cried. "Saina! Behold the lion's mane!" The strange object at which I pointed did indeed look like a tangled mass torn from the mane of a lion. It lay upon the rocky shelf some 3 feet under the water, a curious, waving, vibrating, hairy creature with streaks of silver along its yellow tresses. It pulsated with a slow, heavy dilation and contraction. "It has done enough mischief. Its day is over," I cried. "Help me, Stackhurst. Let us end this murderer forever." There was a big boulder just above the ledge, and we pushed it until it fell, with a tremendous splash into the water. When the ripples had cleared, we saw it had settled upon the ledge below. The once flapping edge of yellow membrane showed that our victim was beneath it. A thick, oily scum oozed out from below the stone and stained the water around, rising slowly to the surface. "Well, this gets me," cried the inspector. "What was it, Mr. Holmes? I'm born and bred in these parts, but I never saw such a thing. It doesn't belong to Sussex." "Just as well for Sussex," I remarked. "It may have been the southwest gale that brought it up. Come back to my house, both of you, and I will give you a terrible experience of one who has good reason to remember his own meeting with the same peril of the seas." When we reached my study, we found that Murdoch was so far recovered that he could sit up. He was dazed in mind, and every now and then was shaken by a paroxysm of pain. In broken words, he explained that he had no notion of what had occurred to him, save for several terrific pains that suddenly shot through him, and that it was taking all of his fortitude to reach the bank. "Here is a book," I said, taking up the little volume, which first brought light into what might have been forever dark. "It is Out of Doors, by the famed observer J.G. Wood. Wood himself very nearly perished from contact with this vile creature, so he wrote with very full knowledge. Cyanea capitala is the miscreant's full name. and he can be as dangerous to life as far more painful than a bite of a cobra. Let me briefly give this extract. If the bather should see a loose, roundish mass of tawny membranes and fibers, something like a large handfuls of a lion's mane in silver paper, let him beware, for this is this fearful stinger, Cyana capitala. Could our sinister acquaintance be more clearly described? He goes on to tell his own encounter with one which, swimming off the coast of Kent, he found that the creature radiated almost invisible filaments to a distance of 50 feet, and that anyone within the circumference of this deadly center was in danger of death. Even at a distance upon the effect the wood was most fatal. The multitudinous threads caused the light scarlet lines upon the skin, which on closer examination resolved into minute dots or pustules, each dot charged as if it were with a red-hot needle marking its way through the nerves. The local pain was, as he explains, the least part of the exquisite torment. Pang shot through the chest, causing me to fall as if struck by a bullet. The pulsations would cease, and then the heart would give 6 or 7 leaps, as if it would force its way through the chest. It nearly killed him, although he had only been exposed to it in a disturbed pool, and not in the narrow calm waters of the bathing pool. He says that he could hardly recognize himself afterwards, so white, wrinkled, and shriveled of his face. He gulped down brandy, a whole bottleful, and it seems to have saved his life. There is the book, Inspector. I leave it with you, and you cannot doubt that it contains a full explanation of the tragedy of poor Macpherson.
And incidentally exonerates me, remarked Ian Murdoch with a wry smile. I do not blame you, Inspector, nor you, Mr. Holmes, for your suspicions were natural. I feel that on the very eve of my arrest I have only cleared up myself by sharing the fate of my poor friend.
No, Mr. Murdoch, I was already upon the track, and I had been out early as I intended. I might have saved you from this terrific experience.
But how did you know, Mr. Holmes?
I am an omnivorous reader with a strangely retentive memory for trifles. The phrase lion's mane haunted my mind. I knew that I had seen it somewhere in an unexpected context. You have seen it as it does describe the creature. I have no doubt that it was floating on the water when Macpherson saw it, and that this phrase was the only one by which he could convey his warning the creature which had been his death.
Then I at least am cleared,
said Murdoch, rising slowly to his feet.
There are 1 or 2 words of explanation which I should give, for I know the discretion in which your inquiries. It is true that I love this lady, but the day that she chose my friend Macpherson, my one desire was to help her with happiness. As I was well content to stand aside and act as her go-between. I often carried their messages, and it was because I was in their confidence, and because she was so dear to me that I hastened to tell her of my friend's death, lest someone should forestall me in a more sudden and heartless manner. She would not tell you, sir, but our relations, lest you should disapprove I should suffer. But with your leave, I must try to get back to the gables, for my bed will be very welcome.
Stalkers held out his hand.
I know it's been a concert pitch, he said. Forgive what is past, Murdoch. We shall understand each other better in the future.
They passed out each other with arms linked in friendly fashion. The inspector remained, staring at me in silence with his ox-like eyes.
Well, you've done it, he cried at last. I'd read you, but I never believed it. It's wonderful.
I was forced to shake my head. To accept such praise was to lower one's own standards. I was slow at the outset, culpably slow. Had the body been found in the water, I could hardly have missed it. It was the towel which had misled me. The poor fellow had never thought to dry himself, and so I, in turn, was led to believe that he never had been in the water. Why, then, should the attack be any water creatures, just except to myself? That was where I went astray. Well, well, Inspector, I often ventured to chaff you gentlemen from the police force, but Cyana Capitala very nearly avenged Scotland Yard. Okay. Would it be bad that if I said I was thinking, man of war, jellyfish? Pretty much the same thing. As soon as you said there was a storm that had swept into the coast, I thought something got washed in. But the whole lion's mane thing did kind of give a better description of it. That's more, well, it's still a jellyfish, but more like a jellyfish anemone crossover. But still. But anyway, we've told our tales for the night. So let us see who we can raid. If anyone has suggestions, by all means, shout them out to me. Let's see. So I see that Dusk is on. I see that Baffy is still on. Faust is on. Haven't raided him for a little while. At least not since the subathon. What's Dusk? Dusk is playing Lethal Company. Yeah, let's go ahead and raid Dusk. Please stick around for the raid. Please. I beg. Not good at begging. But there is an achievement for Red A. What the hell is Red A? But yeah, please stick around for the raid. Raid-F is for followers. There we go. But pick a raid message, either one. We're good. And I will hopefully see some of you tomorrow night, because we're going back to fairy tales, hopefully. So have a good night, evening, whichever it may be, and whichever time zone you exist in, and we'll see you all there. Again, thank you all. Have a good night.